So welcome everybody. My name is Jenny Hornick and I'm the digital marketing specialist here at JMIR Publications. And I'm very excited to welcome you to another webinar in coordination with the Society of Digital Psychiatry and JMIR Mental Health. So today's topic is Beyond Innovation, a framework for digital mental health implementation. And we're going to dive into it in just a moment here. So I'd like everyone to join me in welcoming Dr. John Torous. So Dr. Torous is the director of the Digital Psychiatry Division at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, which is an affiliated teaching hospital of Harvard Medical School. He's also the editor-in-chief of JMIR Mental Health. So I will go ahead and kick things over to you, John, to get us started with today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And today we have a really amazing webinar with two very special guests doing some very exciting work in the policy regulation space. So we have Gareth Hopkin, who's a scientific advisor in science policy and research at NICE, which is the National Institute for Healthcare Excellence, leading a Wellcome-funded project on digital mental health technology, regulation, and evaluation. Gareth began his career in mental health research and holds a PhD in health service research from King's College in London. He's worked in several health technology assessment agencies in the UK and Canada with extensive research in health economics and outcomes research. So we can see why there's a lot he has to share with us. And equally exciting, we have Francesca Edelmann, who has worked for the Medicine and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA, in the UK, which we'll call close to the FDA version of what we have in the US, for the last 8 years. She's currently working on a Wellcome-funded project aiming to clarify the regulation and evaluation of digital mental health technologies as software as a medical device, sometimes called SaMD. Her degree was in biomedical science with a specialization in neurobiology of the brain, and she's also completed training in yoga and counseling, so understands approaches to beyond digital. So thank you so much for joining. From your bios, we know that you're doing really important work in kind of helping bring some order to this digital health space. We've had digital technologies for many years. We've had apps for over a decade. Now we have AI, and I think we're getting closer to wanting to have some order in the space. But to understand the framing of what you're doing, given we have an international audience, maybe tell us a little bit more about what is MHRA and NICE as organizations that are approaching this that you're coming from.
Shall I start, Gareth? Yeah, so thanks very much, John. So as you said, the MHRA is similar sort of function to the FDA for those of you who are based in the USA. And we've got a increasingly big software team, and they are at the moment developing a software change program. So the aim is to try and clarify how the medical device regulations how they work for software products. So it's still relatively a new idea that software can be a medical device. So that's what the team are doing. And then our project here is trying to translate these broad sort of policies for general software as a medical device and trying to get into some of the details and the nuances of why digital mental health technologies in particular can be challenging to regulate and why some people are sort of find it hard to navigate that regulatory system. So we're trying to really find a risk proportionate approach to regulation for digital mental health technology so that innovation can work, but then there's also these barriers in place to ensure that products are effective and safe, and trying to make that clearer for all stakeholders involved, so industry, healthcare professionals, patients, and the public.
And just a point of clarification, would apps kind of fall under this umbrella of virtual reality, AI?
Yeah, good question. What do we mean by it? So we use the phrase digital mental health technologies to incorporate all of those that you mentioned: apps, AI, VR, and everything else under the sun, software and mental health and wellbeing related. And then one of our recent outputs actually of the project is all about trying to help clarify which digital mental health technologies qualify as software as a medical device, which sounds like a simple question, but is actually quite nuanced. So some of the big headlines are: when is it wellbeing? When is it a medical purpose? And when is there enough functionality that it qualifies as software as a medical device? So all VR, most VRs, most that have an AI component, and a lot of the apps would fall as software as a medical device if they have that medical purpose.
That Makes sense. And Gareth, maybe you can tell us a little bit about NICE. I think some people may have heard of it in a lot of the guidelines that you guys put out, but let's get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. And yeah, NICE is England's Health Technology Assessment Agency. So it kind of sits in a wider field, and many countries have similar HD agencies. In Canada, that might be CDA, and Australia, PBAC, and European countries have similar agencies as well. And our core role is to produce guidance on the use of health technologies in the National Health Service in England. And we do that by providing rigorous and independent assessment of what is often very complex evidence for a range of health technologies. So our remit covers medicines and medical devices, and also digital health technologies, which is why this project is very relevant to us. We've increasingly been producing guidance on health technologies or digital health technologies, including digital mental health technologies. And on our website, there's a series of guidance relating to digital therapies for children and adults with anxiety and depression, digital health technologies for managing psychosis, virtual reality technologies for treating agoraphobia. So it's an area that we're really active in and are producing guidance to help guide what's available within the NHS in England.
And I'll dare say that people outside England, like me, read what you guys put out, and it's very applicable across the world too. So thank you. And thinking about regulation, right? No one wants to over-regulate any space. We're talking about digital technologies, we're talking about innovation, we want to increase access to care. But we also have seen that something is not quite working in the potential of digital mental health. So how do you guys think about what are the advantages of regulation if someone's going, but I want it to be completely a free market? What are we aiming towards, and what are we going to win with some smart regulation?
Yeah, so I'll jump in first there. So the goal of regulation really is to try and help those who would like to use a product to choose a good quality, effective, and acceptably safe product, which is also importantly intended for how they want to use it as well. I think all of us working in the field are aware of the vast amount of products that are currently on the market,
Yes.
and the difficulty to distinguish potentially between those that, let's say, have got any clinical evidence and some that have some but not particularly good quality, and then some that have some good quality. So the goal really for regulation is providing a framework to try and help those who are choosing products that is well suited for them and it's good quality.
Anything to add on? Sorry.
So from the NICE perspective, I guess there's the additional kind of consideration of cost effectiveness and the need to ensure that there's value for the taxpayer in delivery of care, so that we're ensuring we're getting care to patients fast, but also considering that side of things. And technologies often come with a range of evidence that needs to be interpreted, and maybe a varying quality and focus on different issues. And the kind of role that NICE plays helps to give a rigorous assessment of that evidence and to consider those kind of issues. We also have a kind of commitment to making sure that technologies get to people quickly, and we take a kind of life cycle approach. We also have an early value assessment program, which helps to make sure that promising technologies get to patients sooner, and that we're able to then assess them while they're in use and look at the evidence that develops over time. So yeah, it's important in making sure that patients are getting the best access to care.
I think this really makes sense what both of you said, because again, as a field, we've also learned how well do these things work against, say, a digital placebo. We don't want to kind of roll out something that's useful, but no better than Tetris. We don't want to roll out something that works well in a clinical trial that's so cumbersome to use. So there are these subtle questions to helping kind of basically help people pick the best ones. And as we alluded to in the introduction, you both are working on a pretty ambitious and exciting project to turn these ideas into reality. Maybe you could give us a little bit of background on kind of the mandate of scope of what you're doing, and share some of the early results or next steps as possible.
Yeah, sounds good. Shall I keep going first? So yes, it's been quite a substantial project, and we're We're at 2 years as well, so we've only got 1 year left of it. So a big part of the whole project has been stakeholder engagement. So we've got a working group and a project board, and we've done a vast amount of other sort of workshops and research for the different stakeholders. So Gareth can talk to some of the points in terms of the publications that you've led on, but a recent output from the regulatory side was the one that I just mentioned, which was this guidance about device characterization. So how do you define what a device does, and then whether it qualifies as software as a medical device or not, and then if it does, what sort of classification it is. And then in terms of some other ones that are coming up from the regulatory side, we are in the initial stages of developing a BSI standard, which John will know about, which is looking at what would good clinical evidencing of digital mental health technologies be. And we're also looking at post-market surveillance aspects. So what would be an adverse event for digital mental health technologies? When do they need to be reported to the regulator? How can people identify them, which is easier said than done. And then lastly, also we're doing some work about significant change. And so what that means is when a product changes to a certain extent that it becomes almost a new product in the eyes of regulation, and how to clarify what that means for those who are developing products. Because as we all know, software products in particular change more than the standard hardware medical device. So yeah, there are a few of the regulatory outputs that we've done and are looking at. I'll leave it to you, Gareth, for the more nice.
Maybe Francesca, you can put the links in the chat to some of the output while we talk of Gareth, because I think there's such amazing resources that everyone listening will I'm going to say everyone should read it. We're going to make it required reading, even though we can't mandate it. It's such a wonderful product you guys have produced, but I'm going to hand it over to you, Gareth.
Yeah, and I guess alongside the kind of work that was focused on regulatory challenges, in our very first work package, there are kind of 2 questions which we were asking ourselves. One is, what are the challenges that these technologies present? So we have a paper outlining some of those key challenges. And the other was actually just what type of technologies are available. So we often use this very, very broad term, digital mental health technologies, but that encompasses such a wide range of technologies. And we were thinking about, how do we think about what's available? How do we group them together? And could that take us closer to thinking about what are their potential benefits, but also what are their potential risks? And then from the NICE perspective, what might their potential costs be, both in terms of how you deliver them, but also the kind of downstream savings that you might see depending on the role. So that's really what brought us to the paper that we published in JMIR Mental Health. We were kind of aware that that was an issue, and we weren't seeing maybe really clear frameworks in how you group digital mental health technologies together to guide us. So we went looking for them. We completed a rapid review of available frameworks where people had drawn links between technologies and domains and how you might categorize them together. And then we took that forward, or that search forward, looked at what domains people were including, had a series of discussions with our expert working group on how we might draw together categories of digital mental health technologies. And then we put forward this framework to maybe start guiding these discussions. And I guess we sort of saw this as a starting point. This is what we'd seen in the literature and our expert working group thought was relevant. It kind of provides a series of domains that may help you to group together technologies, may help you think in more detail about who things are aimed at, what setting they're being delivered in, what their purpose is, what the kind of professional involvement might be. And we put that forward as a kind of framework that others could take forward and use for their more specific purposes. It was a really helpful exercise for us, I think, to get a grasp of what's available and then start to think through these issues of the potential risks and benefits and the costs when you group these technologies together in that way.
Which is, again, very important work and very hard work. As you said, the umbrella term just makes a lot of sense, but the devil really is in the details of how these work. And I said, someone has to help untangle it. And that's why it's so exciting to kind of see you guys doing that work that I'm going to say I think everyone's trying to do in different places, but I would be bold enough to say I think you guys have a hefty lead in beginning to untangle it. One area that you both alluded to was AI, and kind of we're saying AI changes. And I think what's really made AI so interesting, perhaps in a regulatory one, is we know that some of these digital mental health devices will say they're in the wellness space, they treat stress, not anxiety, they treat mood, not depression. But AI really pushes the boundaries between when is a conversation happening, a therapeutic conversation versus therapy, and what is the line. How are you guys thinking of approaching AI? And I say thinking just because it keeps changing, right? What these models can do changes every couple months. And so is there anything you can share with us on the current April 24th, 2025 thought from what we do with AI? Because we don't know what's going to happen on April 25th.
No, it's
Shall I go first, Frankie, and talk about
Oh,
the
yeah.
paper, and then you can maybe take on the regulatory side. But it's something that kept coming up when we were putting our domains together in the paper. And we did consider, should we have a separate domain, which is whether something is AI or not. But I think within what we've put together in the publication, we felt that actually there were links between the challenges you face with AI and other types of digital products. So AI might be seen as a kind of extreme end of interactivity and customization, but actually across lots of digital health products that aren't based on AI, you might also see varying levels of interactivity and customization, which might drive the potential risks and benefits. And again, around human responsiveness, it could be that you have an AI element of a product, which means it has no human responsiveness because the AI is taking that on. But actually, there might be a mix of someone having oversight of an AI chatbot and responding to what's being discussed in that. So it was something we were thinking about when we put together the domains. And yeah, it does seem like AI presents a subset of challenges that are more extreme, but you might also see with a broader type of digital mental health technologies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so you're totally right in terms of it's a moving beast at the moment, and regulators across the world are sort of discussing it as to how sort of to do a harmonized approach with it. I'd maybe point to a few things that are not digital mental health specific. So the FDA, Health Canada, MHRA published good machine learning principles, which are quite a good, I think it's 10 principles, quite a good sort of foundation to discussing how to regulate AI products and how to develop them in a good quality way. Also, another good approach, or we've had some really good feedback from, is MHRA have got an AI airlock scheme, which the best way to describe that is it's sort of like an AI sandbox. So it's had its first pilot at the moment where there were applications for all different digital technologies across different clinical specialities and different sort of maturity of that development as well. And the MHRA, along with the rest of the health ecosystem, have sort of looked at these products and are using them as sort of test beds, seeing what the different issues are. Because what we find with whenever we discuss the regulation of AI products, a lot of it is it's a lot wider than the MHRA remit. So if you're looking at data sources and things like that, so it has a really big impact about what sort of data sources the NHS can provide those who are developing and things like that. So they're doing some really good work there, and there is the hope that they might be able to do an extra year of that pilot. And if anybody is on the call at the moment who has an AI mental health related product, I'd be really keen for someone to add in, because we didn't get a mental health specific one there, but it'd be really great as part of the project as well to see that go through. And then the other things to point from regulatory side, which I think I've just mentioned briefly, was there's a lot of discussion from an international regulatory perspective as to what is significant change, because obviously the big thing about AI is the amount of change it does. And also another term of predetermined change control plans. So that is, in brief, a method of allowing maybe AI products to change without needing to reapply to regulatory agencies, as long as it's within a sort of a plan of, they're expecting that there might be some performance drift for this reason, so we will change it with this process. And if a regulatory sort of signs it off before us, assured that the process is good, then they don't need to tell us about every sort of change, if that makes sense. So there's some of the things that are going on in terms of the discussion points about how to regulate AI, but it's still very much a minefield.
But those are very innovative approaches, especially having that airlock or sandbox to it. A related question, and just looking at our 200 audience members here from across the world, we're talking about, again, a scheme that you guys are doing in England, but clearly most people around the world, we can say, have phones or getting access to them. Apps are somewhat universal. AI is somewhat universal. How much of the regulation becomes specific, say, to one region, or are these actually global issues that need even a broader lens?
I think it's safe to say that the challenges that everyone is finding is every jurisdiction is aware of them, and it's reassuring to some extent. And I think there's also a lot of power in collaborating on some of those as well. So definitely from the MHRA perspective, we try and harmonise as much as possible to what's going on, and that's within medical device regulation, but also what's going on with more sort of horizontal standards as well, such as the EU AI standard, which is looking at AI in various different use cases as well, which I think could be really useful.
Yeah, even just the resources you share in the chat are wonderful outputs. I would, again, would argue that people can learn so much no matter what jurisdiction you're looking at. These are pretty universal concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe a final question, just thinking, sometimes, again, regulation, innovation, and how we kind of think about or approach these things can be a little bit intimidating. People can go, oh, that's beyond my scope or my remit. How can people be involved, share their opinions, advocate for the standards they want to see in it? What are the best approaches for people to take if they just want to be more active in the space or start a career in the space and kind of do the great things you guys are doing?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. In terms of inputting actually into our specific project, I really recommend, I think the first link I sent is our project webpage, and on there you'll be able to sign up to newsletters, and we usually put any sort of opportunities for engagement or feedback and so forth. As I said, we're really making sure that stakeholder engagement is a big part of it, and that we're sort of building a consensus with everybody in the field, not just us, because that won't work on many levels. So I really recommend that. And then also similarly, following sort of the web pages and the social media of the regulator of the jurisdiction that you're interested in, or others. And it's quite common practice now for regulators to put out consultations before they write guidance, and when they do put out guidance, to ask for feedback. And it's always a bit of a live document that's forever changing. So I think everybody, it'd be the more feedback you get for these sort of things, the better. Gareth, I don't know whether you want to speak to any points before
I think it's good advice, and so I think from my perspective, I started this project probably as a relative novice in regulation and was very well versed in the evidence and health economics and the nice side of things, but not so much on the MHRA side. And I really recommend people sitting down and engaging with the documents and reading through them in full. I think the MHRA and other agencies have a lot of good guidance which helps explain things. In our project, we've put out the guidance on qualification and classification, which I think is really accessible. So I think, yeah, for people starting out or interested, engaging with those materials is really helpful. And from the NICE perspective, I mean, going back to when I was learning about what NICE did as a PhD student or early in my career, I think it's really helpful to look at things like the NICE manual and getting to know our methods and processes well, and also looking through evaluations and reading the full documents to look at how the decisions are made and what evidence is supporting these decisions. I think like doing an in-depth review of those kind of things is really helpful in learning more than you would maybe from just papers or summaries of things themselves.
Yeah, and just reviewing your materials, perhaps because I'm nerdy, I've read all of them, they're fascinating, but like there's so much involvement from people from lived experience, from clinical stakeholders, from technology companies. You really are getting all the different voices there. It's not like there's one team or one camp or one view that you've taken. I think that's what makes this such an exciting effort and so nice to read, is you're really looking for every voice, and I dare say hunting for voices that aren't coming to the surface and really making sure they're represented. And I think it's just a nice approach that people can see. I want to switch to some questions. There's a lot of questions. We'll do as many as we can. And again, I think we've given people so much reading to do that there may be more, but this one is saying, I guess getting at the value of there's different types of evidence, different quality of evidence, into thinking of early value assessments or kind of promising early evidence. Is there a way to kind of kite mark or signal things that we think are promising of early evidence? Are we waiting until the evidence is very secure? How are we approaching different types or grades of evidence?
I guess it's a very, from the NICE perspective, it's a tricky one to answer because it does come down to a very case by case basis. And so technologies have a very specific intended purpose that the evidence then sort of flows from. And so it does become a kind of very case by case basis. I guess from the NICE perspective and our program, maybe more specifically, is about looking for those technologies which there's enough evidence to suggest that they have promise and that using them in routine care would be beneficial and could help generate further evidence. And so I don't appreciate it's probably not a very specific answer, but it does come down to the specific technologies and decisions that get made on a case by case basis.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. And a lot of, again, I'm not speaking as a regular, but sometimes even as a journal editor, what I sometimes look for is if it's a prediction algorithm hasn't replicated in a different setting, because it's always easy to find something. And sometimes as an intervention, how well has it done against kind of an active control? Because if you compare something to a waitlist control, at least again, from my non-regular point of view, it's not hard to beat. I'll be somewhat flippant looking at a wall or doing nothing. And again, we have so many different digital health technologies that I would personally wonder, like, is a waitlist control still a valid comparison, given that we have free apps today and that people can access them? So that's we don't have to answer that question. That's John's perspective on it. But a different real question I see here is thinking about youth mental health. We know that there's a lot of interest and need in youth mental health, and there's different risks in youth mental health decision making. Are we going to have to stratify kind of these rules and regulations for those, say, under 18 versus over 18? That's, again, a hard question, but what's our guiding principles for youth versus non-youth?
In terms of the regulation, because a lot of the regulations are kind of process driven, so it's all based on what a product is intended for. So if a product is intended for children and young people, we would hope to see the risk assessment will be different, for example, the evidence would be different, and so that it's sort of built into the processes. So it's not something that's we've kind of got an extra a different review on it if it's children or young people. And the main sort of way that it's done from a regulatory point of view is what the classification is of the technology, and that will, if it's a class 1, then they won't need an approved body or a check, and class 2A and above would. And usually maybe children, young people in a particular clinical speciality might make that considered a higher risk product and therefore a higher risk regulatory classification, and therefore would require the third party approval. So that's sort of the way that that type of thing would be built into the regulatory system, if that makes sense. That
does, in terms of it. If this is an interesting question, kind of looking maybe 5 years ahead, what does these concepts we've talked about, how do they translate into care? Is it that we've educated all stakeholders, patients, clinicians, payers on how to make smart decisions? Are we putting seals of approval on things? Are we just steering products? And again, none of us can predict the future, but what does kind of success look like, maybe, where you guys say this has worked exactly as we wanted it to?
I think the first one, to your point, an awareness of the regulations, which sounds like a low bar, but it's surprising how much is being in use potentially without the realization of whether it should have been regulated or not. So that's actually one of our ambitions in the software team generally, is that people are aware that a software product could be a medical device. And then definitely a further one would be patients and public are aware, which is kind of a different aspect. And we're trying to sort of gear some of our outputs to patients and the public so they can also understand that a product could be a medical device, and there's a way to try and check that it's good quality. And then, of course, the ultimate is raising the bar for quality and effectiveness and clinical evidence for these products, and yeah, really having some reassurance about them as well.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, maybe we have time for one more question we'll squeeze in. We've talked about different populations and needs, and someone's bringing up the needs of older adults. And again, I think there's very good evidence that older adults use technology too. There's maybe some people need a little extra training, but there's a huge opportunity of support for older adults in this field, sometimes ignored. Are there any special considerations for, again, that population, or do our broad principles still apply?
I would say for the regulatory thing, yeah, there's a bit about that could fall into the classification bit. So I'll maybe let Gareth speak to if there's anything on the NICE side.
I guess not so much on the NICE side. It's something I have personal interest in. I've done some work in dementia before and other topics in older adults. And in the UK, we'd call the kind of two systems, the health system and the social care system. And when you're dealing or thinking about older adults, it brings in a lot more involvement of the social care system, which sits slightly more trickier across all of the pathways that we deal with, and is often seen as kind of less thought about, with the focus being on health. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic, thinking about digital technologies and older adults, is where can they be used to support social care, where are the kind of links between health and social care, and then how, as regulators and HT agencies, we think about the links between those two and make sure that we're capturing benefits from social care technologies, but also thinking about where the kind of burdening costs lie and make sure we're addressing that. So I think that element of it is really interesting.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a population that I think sometimes gets overlooked, and I think there's so much interest in benefit. Of course, digital health technologies can benefit almost every population. I think we've covered too, but I think we've gone a little bit over time. I appreciate you both taking time to teach us so much and sharing so much reading and resources. I think as people on this webinar go through them, I think they'll learn a lot and be excited to do it. And I appreciate you just showing that there's ways to be involved to kind of do it, because this is evolving. I think the one takeaway I've done is we're learning together. You guys are building wonderful systems, but everyone can have a voice in it. We can steer it. The technology is changing, and I think it's nice to see these things evolving. It's the right time for it. So thank you both for joining. Thank you for the JMIR team, Society of Digital Psychiatry, for hosting, and thank you everyone for listening. Till next time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all.